You notice we have a full house, liturgically speaking, and so it's where Philip was sitting here is where I normally keep my music stand that I use sometimes for my notes. And we were trying to figure out what to call that, and I was overruled when I suggested porta-pulpit. That was not a well-received suggestion. So for the time being, music stand it is. You know, we've talked recently a lot about the number of believers in our world declining. And according to some estimates, the number of faithful is perhaps percentage-wise, perhaps lower now than it's ever been. And I talked recently with a colleague from the Diocese of Utah, and we mused about what the Diocese of Utah says and has said now for quite some time. The Diocese of Utah claims 5,000 active baptized members, but they've been claiming those same 5,000 active baptized members for more than 10 years. So I'm sure that number is likely very much inflated. And theologians and pastors scratch their heads about why the number of the faithful seems to keep dwindling, and everyone seems to have their own hypotheses, and I happen to have one of mine as well. Now, I believe that everyone's soul craves communion with God and his people. And I happen to think that sometimes his people have not always done a great job of sharing his love. Pastors, religious scholars, theologians, and otherwise intelligent people continue to promote what I call bad theology. And when we learn bad theology, we have less interest in staying faithful to God. Now you might be saying, whoa, Father Tim, that's a pretty big claim to make without backing it up. And that's true. But I do have my own experiences that I can use as an example of what I'm talking about. And when I was a kid, I was taught that I always had to accept what happened in my life. Because that was, I was told, God's will. When my beloved uncle died when I was a child, that was God's will. When my childhood dog died, the first time I ever lost a beloved pet, that was God's will. When my mother was diagnosed with an illness, that was God's will. When the first Gulf War broke out on my 9th birthday, that was God's will. When the World Trade Center was attacked by terrorists, again, God's will. When I was let go from a job for the first time, God's will. Now, for every good thing that happened in my life, there certainly were some bad things. And if the good things that happened were blessings, and the bad things that happened were God's will, well, that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. Is God playing chess with us, making moves on a board that result in either good or bad things happening to us? I'd say if that's what's happening, that's pretty messed up. And if so, that's bad theology. That's the kind of bad theology that turns people away from God. The island of Maui recently suffered horrendous fires. Southern California is expecting a direct hit from a hurricane for the first time in many years. Arizona had the hottest summer ever. Florida's beaches saw water temperatures exceeding the recommended temperatures of our backyard hot tubs. The Ukraine continues to fight back against Russian forces that invaded a year and a half ago. Racism, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, and other isms continue to wound and harm the people of God. And bad theology would teach us that all of these are the result of God's will. And bad theology teaches us that we simply must accept everything that happens to us, even if it's bad. Well, my friends, let me explain something to you. Bad theology kills. And we all must try our hardest to change directions on our path whenever we find that our road is taking us in a direction that leads toward bad theology. Now, how do we know if we're heading down that bad theology road? Here's my litmus test, okay? It's pretty simple. If God is a jerk, then it's bad theology. Now, I would use a different word in a different setting, but we'll use the word jerk. If God is a jerk, then it's bad theology. Now, like me, you were probably taught at some point in your life that you couldn't be mad at God when something bad happened in your life. I'm guessing, like me, you were probably taught that you had to just roll with the punches. Everything happens for a reason. That's what some people say. Everything happens for a reason. And if everything happens for a reason and those reasons don't seem to start showing up, then it's no wonder that people don't want to have any part in a faith tradition that enforces that kind of belief. Good theology, on the other hand, teaches us that it is, in fact, okay to be mad at God. It's okay to give our burdens to God. It's okay to throw our emotional responses His way. God can take it. And how do we know? Well, we have this passage that we just heard today from Matthew's Gospel. In that passage, a woman does just that. She gets mad at Jesus, and she even lets Jesus know that she's mad at him. Now, this passage can be difficult to swallow because it kind of goes against my litmus test. In this passage, Jesus is kind of a jerk. And if Jesus is God, and if God is a jerk, then it's bad theology. Well, let's remember that faith is hard, and it's a challenge to be faithful when things seem to contradict. And his jerk-like behavior here is his humanity seemingly contradicting the good nature of his inherent divinity. And if we separate the two, then we're committing a heresy. But Jesus is fully divine, and he is fully human. And here's an instance where he let his own human biases interfere with his divine identity. Now, what if instead of parsing it in our minds, we look at it for ourselves as an opportunity to be Christ-like? Now, remember those bracelets that kids used to wear that say WWJD, what would Jesus do? Well, I don't always know what Jesus would do. Sometimes we can imagine what we think Jesus might do, but we really don't know what Jesus would do in all circumstances. But here's an example of something Jesus did. He said something mean, he was called out for it, and he corrected his behavior. What a novel concept that is. What did Jesus do? He taught us how to correct our behavior and to do the right thing. It can be hard being a Christian these days because so many Christians behave in ways that don't seem to go along with Jesus' teachings. And when they do behave that way, it makes other people leery. The most important thing for us to remember is that we're not perfect. I try to do my best as a follower of Jesus. I try to lead you to do your best. But I know I'll get it wrong sometimes, and I know we'll get it wrong sometimes. And that's okay. That's okay as long as we learn from getting it wrong and we make amends whenever we can. You see, if that was the message that all the lapsed Christians would have learned, or if non-believers would have heard it first, they might have continued to give the church a chance. Humans are not bad. We're simply imperfect. And we're called to learn from our imperfections. If I say something hurtful to you, even if it's not intentionally hurtful, and you tell me that it was hurtful, it's my responsibility to apologize and then to learn from it. And next time, I'll try to remember in our interaction to do better. It's so easy and so complicated at the same time. Jesus teaches us to be kind. But being kind is not always the easy thing to do. Sometimes it's hard to be kind. Sometimes it's a whole lot easier to be mean. But meanness is associated with being a jerk. And if God is a jerk, then that's bad theology. If we are jerks, then we're not demonstrating proper Christian behavior, even if it is easier. Kindness prevails. Kindness is in line with good theology. Bad theology kills, but good theology saves. Go out and save. Amen.